but now with the efficiency that we need in these difficult times. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call a roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. And here in the Senate in a quorum call, waiting for senators to come to the floor, the Senate earlier passing a bill on drug compounding centers. That was by voice vote. It heads to the president next for signing. And later today, there'll be up to 2 votes scheduled. 5:30 Eastern time, they'll be voting on whether or not to move forward on the nomination of Robert Wilkins to be a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and then a vote to start work on defense programs. That's Senate Bill 1197. 60 votes needed for both the nomination and the defense authorization to move forward. And while we're in a quorum call here on the Senate floor, we'll take a look at an interview we held earlier today on Washington Journal about what's ahead with the health care law this week.
Now it's Kyle Cheney of Politico. He is health care reporter to give us a good update here on the Affordable Care Act, where it is and where it's going. And why don't we start with the House vote on Friday? Sure. Remind us exactly what the House was voting on, how it was different from what the President said the day before, but what it means.
The House voted Friday, pretty strongly for a bill proposed by Congressman Fred Upton, who's a Republican from Michigan. Not a fan of the Affordable Care Act, and his proposal, which was called, I think it was called the Keep Your Health Plan Act or something along those lines, was intended to get at the issue of people whose plans are being canceled. Where it differs from what the President was proposing is that his plan, according to supporters of the Affordable Care Act, would actually undermine the law by allowing people to sign up newly for some of these plans that don't meet the requirements of the Affordable Care Act. So in other words, if a plan was getting phased out because it lacked benefits that the Affordable Care Act requires, the Upton bill would allow people not only to keep those plans, but also to actually sign up for those plans newly in 2014. The President's proposal differed in the sense that he doesn't want people to remain on those plans long term. He's just providing sort of a grace period for those people who might be losing their plans otherwise.
One of the significant critiques of the dozens of health care related votes in the House in recent years is that they were meaningless. This one, how important was it?
The analysis has been across the board, but what was significant about this is 39 Democrats sided with Republicans on this, and so it showed a clear attraction to Democrats, especially vulnerable Democrats who are up for re-election, obviously, all next year. And so while the proposal doesn't necessarily have a chance of passing in its current form, it showed a little bit more about where the country is, where the mindset is, and where the politics are on the health law these days. And there's a lot of concern out there that Democrats are vulnerable on this issue of people losing their health plans.
To that point, Nancy Pelosi, the minority leader in the House, stepped in over the weekend on one of the Sunday morning shows to talk specifically about Democrats, that vote, and health care. Here's a look.
I don't think you can tell what will happen next year, but I will tell you this. Democrats stand tall in support of the Affordable Care Act. We have great candidates who are running, who are concerned about our economy, and are concerned that the government was shut down because of a whim on the part of the Republicans, costing us $25 billion to our economy and 6.6% of our GDP growth. They're concerned that overwhelming the American people support immigration reform, support background checks, support ending discrimination against people in the workplace. All of these kinds of things are the concerns of the American people. Jobs will be the major issue in the campaign, as they always are. And this is an issue that has to be dealt with. But it doesn't mean, oh, it's a political issue, so we're going to run away from it. Okay. No, it's too valuable for the American people. What is important about it is that the American people are well served, not who gets reelected.
Kyle Cheney, any follow-up?
Leader Pelosi clearly wants to turn the page on the crisis of the moment with the Affordable Care Act, and I think the Democrats, as a rule, want to do that. And the question is, will they be able to? And I think there's hope among Democrats that this immediate crisis will pass, and that they'll be able to the Affordable Care Act and all the website problems that have plagued it and all these cancellation notices will eventually become just a blip on the screen, and people will start realizing and recognizing the benefits in a wholesale way. So they'll be able to talk about all those other priorities in the campaign trail next year. A lot's going to depend, if they get to talk about things like ENDA and jobs and all those other issues, is whether they can actually get the health care law off the front pages, and meaning by that meaning ending the crises that are going on.
Our guest is Kyle Cheney, who is health care reporter for Politico, and we should point out we were hoping to have Alex Wayne join us as well. He is from Bloomberg News health policy reporter. Unfortunately, Mr. Wayne won't be able to join us, but we do have Kyle Cheney to help with any information about the law. The rollout, of course, what's happening. We've been talking about the congressional bill already, and we'll get to your calls in just a moment, but want to follow up on this House bill, Mr. Cheney, the Upton bill. So we know the President is about to veto that legislation, but is there anything like it in the works in the Senate?
There is, and it's a Democratic-sponsored bill. Senator Mary Landrieu has her own proposal, which doesn't quite go as far as the Upton bill, but would have somewhat the same effect. I've heard it compared to, if the Upton bill was sort of a real rebuke to the Affordable Care Act, the Landrieu bill is like a slap on the wrist, where it still, basically chastises the president for his, if you like your health plan, you can keep it remarks, and would take a swipe at the Affordable Care Act in terms of enabling people to stay on certain plans that don't meet the requirements. And the political fate of that bill is also an open question. It's not the Upton bill. I think it's not as scary to Democrats as the Upton bill may have been, but it is also a sign that Democrats are uneasy about the politics of people losing their health plans.
Are there any big hearings or big meetings that we should know about heading into the week?
I'm not 100% sure what's on the docket. I know that obviously that bill in particular is going to get a lot of attention. I think the Senate probably will consider that in some form or another. The President obviously tried to take that off the agenda with his own fix, but it doesn't seem to have mollified everyone. So I think we haven't heard the last of obviously the Landrieu bill and other proposals like it.
Let's try our first call. Betty Lou from Davenport, Florida, independent, for Kyle Cheney of Politico. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Doing well.
Thank you for C-SPAN. I had my policy canceled. I'm a senior citizen. I lost my mate November the 8th, and he was 16 years older than I am. I'm going to be 82, and he got canceled because of pre-existing diseases, but he went on to hospice, which I cannot praise. They just took a whole bunch off of my shoulders. But after listening to the president, and I had already gotten a policy that was so much better than what they canceled me on, no referrals. Oh, those referrals, you could be 3 weeks. If I had cancer of the skin in 3 weeks, it took to get a referral. By that time, the cancer had grown twice the size. So I called my insurance company and told them that I'd listened to the president, and if this went through, would they reinstate me, even though I had another policy? This is their answer. Oh, we didn't cancel you because of the Affordable Care Act. A year ago when you joined up with us, we were already in the process of selling to another insurance agency. They changed their story completely, and I think that's what these people are going to find out, that it's not the Affordable Care Act, it's the insurance companies.
Thanks, Betty Lou. Kyle Cheney.
Sure, and I was wondering if Betty Lou is on Medicare, because obviously anyone over 65, they're not really going to be entering the new Obamacare, Affordable Care Act insurance programs. But she did hit on a point, Betty Lou did hit on a point about the fact that insurance companies in a lot of cases are the ones that are changing these plans. And one thing that the White House is really trying to emphasize is that even prior to the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies were the ones making wholesale changes to people in the individual market who buy their own coverage. And so a lot of these cancellations were not necessarily directly derived from his health law. And I think that's a point that he's really been trying to hammer home.
You also write about state regulators, Kyle Cheney. Here is your updated piece in Politico from today. States divided over complying with Obamacare fix. Regulators, you write, aren't rushing to President Obama's rescue after the White House attempt to fix the rising wave of canceled health insurance policies. Tell us more.
Sure. Well, one of the things, when President Obama announced his fix last week, the idea was basically he kicked the problem to insurance companies and state insurance regulators. He said, we won't enforce the provisions in the Affordable Care Act that say, you know, you can't keep a substandard plan. But the problem is, states can't allow you to stay on that unless they change some of their rules and regulations or even laws in some cases, and also the insurance companies have to play ball too. But what we've seen is state regulators, even if they want to comply with the president's wishes, they might be constrained because they have to do it quickly. They only have a few weeks to really get their rules and regulations updated, and especially if it takes a law change, those things can take months or more. So a lot of them are saying, even if we were interested, we couldn't do it. And a lot of them are just saying flat out they're not interested because they don't want to reintroduce these sort of substandard plans back into the market. And so it remains to be seen how many people the president's fix will apply to, because if states don't go along, it could be a very small number.
Let's hear from Michelle, Minneapolis, Republican for Kyle Cheney. Hey, Michelle.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
About 6 months ago, one of your ladies from the Kaiser Institute had mentioned that, and something that no one's really talking about recently is the fact that these people, they keep on talking about subsidies for people who might need them. Apparently, it's in the law that if your state did not expand Medicaid, the people in your state do not qualify for the subsidy because they didn't have enough money to qualify everybody. So that's going to hit the fan, because Paul Ryan is also, every time he gets in front of every time they have one of these congressional hearings, he mentions, when he's talking to these representatives for the health care plan, he mentions to them, oh, by the way, there is a clawback feature. And if they accidentally give somebody a subsidy that's not supposed to get a subsidy, technically, they're supposed to go back after the next year when that is all flushed out with the tax, via the tax system. They're supposed to go back and claw this money back, and also when all these congressmen say, well, yeah, you can get a subsidy, they don't understand. People can't even afford with a subsidy. What's really different about this, people are not used to paying a monthly payment for their health care. A lot of these people, it's just, they don't realize that the people out there can't afford these plans, especially, you get somebody who's only paying $200 a month, but that's $2,400 a year, and then they find out that there's a $6,000 deductible. That's $8,000 before the insurance companies even have to pay anything.
Let's hear from our guest.
Well, you touched on sort of the gamut of issues that I think people are concerned about. One, on Medicaid expansion, I'm not sure if there's a relationship with the subsidies that are available through the exchanges, which are for people of different income levels. But you are right that states that haven't expanded Medicaid, it's not that they can't give out subsidies, it's that they lose out on potentially billions and billions of dollars that would go to helping cover the Medicaid population, which is really the lowest income people in the state. So states that have turned that down, their existing Medicaid programs, no matter how ungenerous they are, how narrow they are for people, or they don't cover single adults or childless adults, those would remain in place for the most part in states that aren't accepting Medicaid dollars. On the other point, though, you said that people who get a subsidy that they weren't entitled to have to have that clawed back, and that's actually true, which is a process called reconciliation. At the end of the first year, when people go to file their taxes in 2015, they'll say, how was your income? Was it what you expected it to be? And if your income was higher than you thought, you actually have to give back a portion of your tax credit.
By the dates here, a little bit about where we've been and where we're headed on the Affordable Care Act. Sign up again October 1st, as we know and we've heard about. Coverage would be set to begin a little more than a year, January 1st, or a few months, I should say, January 1st, 2014. Consumers can now wait as late as March 31st of next year to sign up without a penalty. Some other facts and figures here through November 2nd, from October 1st to November 2nd. 106,000 plus elected health plans are out there. 74.8% are state-based marketplace plans. The rest, 25.2%, federally facilitated marketplace plans. A couple of other figures here to let you know about. Just under 1 million people have gone through the process but have not yet picked a plan. And just under 400,000 are eligible for Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program, the CHIP program. And then, of course, the numbers who've actually signed up have been very much in the news lately.
Sure.
What has the government said lately, and when will they report again? Do we know?
Looks like we'll probably expect them on a monthly basis, so sometime early to mid-December will be our next round. And that round's going to be a lot more significant because, A, it'll show any progress they've made fixing the broken enrollment system, the website, which has really blocked people in October. So we'll get a sense of what kind of progress they're making. And two, we're going to find out if young people are signing up. Because what's not in those numbers is what's the mix of people that are getting covered. If the Obama administration needs young people to sign up to help offset the cost of the older and sicker population. So we're supposed to get a clearer breakdown of that in December. So in some ways, those numbers will actually matter more than the first round, which sort of set the baseline for going forward. The number you described, that 945,000, I think it is, that have gone through the process but haven't selected a plan, that in some ways is a number that is buoying the White House because all the people have to do, presuming the site has worked for them that far, is click on a health plan. And what they're hoping is that people are actually shopping. They're comparing plans. They're taking their time. They're not stuck at a blue screen error message, and so they're hopeful that those people are actually in the marketplace.
There's that number. They have 975,407 folks. This according to HHS. Another key date, November 1st. Wanted to talk a little bit more about that. That's the date that the administration says the website will
November 30th.
November 30th,
right.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Sure.
A lot of dates and numbers out there. But November 30th is the next key date. Explain what you're looking for to happen. And we've already seen over the weekend expectations being lowered a little bit, didn't we?
And it's been a sort of steady process of lowering expectations for what November 30th is going to mean. But as we know, the enrollment system on healthcare.gov, which is where people in most states are going to sign up for these new subsidized tax credit-based insurance plans on the exchanges, it has not worked well at all. It's barely worked, but it has gotten slowly better. And the White House has called in this sort of a crack team of tech experts to fix the site, and they've said by November 30th we're going to have the enrollment system up and running for the vast majority of users. That's been the amorphous
Quorum be vitiated.
With objection, it will be suspended.
Mr. President, I'm here to talk about the piece of legislation that I've introduced that I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting. But first, I would like to just make a couple of comments about the terrific storms that roared through the Midwest, including my state, yesterday afternoon and evening. Mother Nature was in full fury, and it caused significant damage to my state, and fortunately, no deaths were reported. Injuries, destroyed buildings, turned over cars, downed trees, power lines down, quite a bit of damage sweeping across our state, affecting a significant number of towns, Muncie, Kokomo, Marion, Lebanon, Washington, Lafayette, and others. It was a line of storms that packed a lot of power and did a lot of damage. We were fortunate in Indiana not to suffer loss of life. Our neighbors to the west, Illinois, took the brunt of this storm, and our thoughts and prayers go out to their families and those loved ones that were lost in that storm. There's been a good response by FEMA. The people are on the ground already. Assessments are being made, and Hoosiers are rolling up their sleeves and cleaning it up as I fully expect them to do. So the response has been terrific. But certainly have to acknowledge that this caused some severe damage, but the response has been terrific in terms of addressing it. Now, the bill I would like to talk about is Senate Bill 1471, the Alicia Dawn Kale Respect for National Cemeteries Act, which hopefully I think will come before the Senate this week. Now, I wish this legislation wasn't necessary. It shouldn't be. There were tragic events that happened on May 30th, 2012. Obviously, we wish that had never happened and wish there never had to be a bill named after Alicia Kale. I regret the Department of Veterans Affairs made a mistake that resulted in even more pain and heartbreak for this family, which is already suffering from that heartbreak and the loss of Alicia Dawn Kale. What are the circumstances? On May 30th, 2012, Michael LaShawn Anderson went on a shooting spree at an Indianapolis apartment complex, injuring 3 people and taking the life of Alicia Dawn Kale, a devoted wife and loving mother of 2 children. As police were arriving at the scene, Anderson then killed himself. Shortly after, the Kale family faced the unimaginable, putting their mother and wife to rest. They discovered that the local Department of Veterans Affairs cemetery officials had made a very disturbing mistake. The VA erroneously granted the shooter a burial with military honors at Fort Custer National Cemetery in Augusta, Michigan on June 6, 2012. And although Anderson was a U.S. veteran, his unthinkable act made him ineligible by law to be buried in a national cemetery. We passed a law prohibiting a veteran, even though they've given service, from benefiting from the honors of a military cemetery burial. But after learning that Anderson was given this distinct honor of being buried alongside our country's heroes in a national cemetery, the Kale family requested that the VA disinter his remains. For over a year, they contacted our staff, me, together. We worked, and we've been working with the VA and the Kale family to remove Anderson's remains from Fort Custer National Cemetery in Michigan. However, earlier this year, the VA informed me personally that it could not exhume the remains of Anderson because the department doesn't believe it has the legal authority to do so without the Congress passing legislation and signature by the President. In other words, the VA was not permitted under current law to bury Anderson at the National Cemetery, but the department's legal interpretation of the law says it doesn't have the legal authority to fix that mistake and exhume the remains of this ineligible veteran. So legislation had to be offered to right this wrong. The bill that is being presented here would grant both the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense the authority to disinter ineligible veterans buried in national cemeteries who have created or committed a federal or state capital crime. It would give the VA the authority it needs to exhume the remains of Michael Anderson. Now, last month, I testified in support of this bill at a Senate Veterans Affairs Committee meeting, and I was pleased to be joined at the hearing by Alicia's father-in-law, Frank, and mother-in-law, Carol, who traveled here to Washington from Fort Wayne, Indiana, in support of this particular bill. And I want to thank Chairman Bernie Sanders and Ranking Member Richard Burr and members of the committee for immediately grasping the nature of this and being willing to do everything possible to help us move this legislation. And it couldn't have been done without their support, and their efforts have been advanced and expedited by their commitment to support this and to have Senate action on the legislation as soon as possible. So I'm here today to urge my colleagues to support and pass this Alicia Dawn Kale Respect for National Cemeteries Act. The victims and family members of this tragic shooting have suffered enough and should not be forced to wait much longer to have their requests met. Now, as a veteran myself, I have the deepest respect for those who have worn the uniform to serve and defend our country. But no veteran who commits a capital crime should be given the honor of a military burial and be laid to rest next to our nation's military heroes. That's the law today, and we need to make sure that that law is followed. And by passing this legislation, we can resolve an unacceptable mistake that helped provide the family with a sense of peace and closure. My Indiana colleague, Congresswoman Susan Brooks, has introduced legislation in the House and is working to carry this across the finish line. So I urge my colleagues here to pass Senate Bill 1471, the Alicia Dawn Kale Respect for National Cemeteries Act, and ensure that our fallen veterans can rest in peace next to loved ones and fellow service members, not against criminals who have created such a horrendous crime. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Thank you. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Around in Republican circles for a long time that don't necessarily have the sweeping nature of the Affordable Care Act, and maybe that's by design, but it also, the Affordable Care Act in some sense does rely on a lot of Republican ideas that were maybe cobbled together in a way that Republicans now can no longer support, or politically they can't support, but a lot of those ideas were from the Republican tool chest, which makes it harder to, again, articulate what the alternative would be these days.
To the other side, here's a tweet from Lynn Holly Hansen. Will the Dems who voted for the Upton bill, so we said there were 39 of them, will they have a progressive primary challenge so that we can vote them out? What's the future there?
I think those Democrats were reacting to their districts in a sense, but it is a great question as to whether they'll draw, there would be a more robust debate on the Democratic side about the future of health care, because one of the things we've heard is that if the Affordable Care Act falls apart, or if Democrats run away from the Affordable Care Act, one of the places they'll turn is not to what the Republicans are doing, but to single payer, which is an idea that doesn't have a lot of political support these days, but is something a lot of people on the left would really like. And so if the Affordable Care Act continues to sort of languish and doesn't get fixed, you may start hearing those voices on the left, and whether they challenge people in primaries or not, I don't know, but you may hear that argument raised a little more loudly.
To Old Forge, Pennsylvania now. Lauren is on the line for Republicans, for Kyle Cheney. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Steve Fan, and thank you for taking the call. I appreciate it. I'm commenting on Nancy Pelosi's statements and Barack Obama's statements in regards to if you can keep your health care plan if you would like to. Those of us in the Republican Party and in the Tea Party warned about this when we spoke about how people were going to lose their insurance. It's a very simple concept. When you add more mandates to an insurance company to provide free services, they're not technically free. They're going to increase the rates, just like any company would, because they can't afford to pay for that. They don't have taxpayer money supporting them like the government does. So for the president to say that, it was a complete lie. And had he not said that, he would not have won the election. That is the simple and fact in regards to why he said what he did. He had to say it, or he would not have been reelected. Now, after the election and this whole year before all this happened, all we heard about is how it was a mandate that the people elected him, that they were in favor of the health care bill. But they were in favor of the health care bill because they were told that they can keep their current insurance policies, which were not what they're calling bad policies. They did cover what they wanted them to cover. What they didn't cover were these new mandates by the health care bill for mental health, women paying for prostate cancer, men paying for maternity care. So, you know, for them to say that the health care, that Barack Obama's reelection was showing in favor of the health care bill, well, sure it was, but now it's not.
Well, you know, and I think you raised some interesting points. I think, you know, one of the things that people sometimes forget is that the president and insurance companies were pretty much allies in getting this bill done. And so you mentioned those mandates, which is a good point. But on the flip side, there's the big mandate, which is the individual mandate, which requires most people to purchase or obtain insurance or face a penalty, which is also one of the most reviled provisions in the law generally around the country. But that was the provision favored by insurance companies because it would put more people in their plans. So while including younger and healthier people who don't cost as much to cover. So you're right about these new mandates that can tend to cost more and can add cost in some ways. But by adding millions of new people into these plans, into these private plans, the hope was that they would balance out that cost and sort of make the law work financially.
Fred from Brenham, Texas, Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. I want to remind everyone of what has actually occurred in the years since President Obama took office. You'll recall that there was a meeting on the night he became president of GOP leaders, and they promised one another that they would not vote for anything that he was supporting, and they have followed through on that in the years between. And recall that the GOP members of Congress had the opportunity and did participate in planning for the act, and then they just quit and would not vote for it. But the main thing that I want to say is that the GOP members of Congress are in direct opposition to the terms of the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution specifically states the responsibilities of Congress, both the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Let's hear from our guest.
Well, you know, what that alludes to in a nutshell is how difficult the politics of healthcare reform have been. I think it's one of the things that's been used as a bludgeon over and over again is the fact that not a single Republican did vote for the iteration of the Affordable Care Act that ultimately passed into law. And because of that, it's been easy for Republicans now to look back and say, this was a Democratic bill, this was a bill that passed purely along Democratic lines. This was not, you know, some great bipartisan new entitlement. This was purely ran through by a Democratic Congress. And that's made it difficult to gain traction, I guess, around the country. It's been easy for Republicans to come back and fight it. You know, the president likes to point to Massachusetts and say, you know, our law was based on Massachusetts, but the reform they passed there under Governor Mitt Romney, Republican, in 2006. But that law had huge bipartisan support in the state legislature and made it easy to go back and fix things when they didn't work and really tinker with it all throughout the years.
Here is a little bit from the president late last week on all this.
And the American people, those who got cancellation notices, do deserve and have received an apology from me. But they don't want just words. What they want is whether we can make sure that they are in a better place and that we meet that commitment. And by the way, I think it's very important for me to note that you know, there are a whole bunch of folks up in Congress and others who made this statement, and they were entirely sincere about it. And the fact that you've got this this percentage of people who've had this you know, impact, I want them to know that you know, their senator or congressman, they were making representations based on what I told them and what this White House and our you know, administrative staff told them. And so it's not on them, it's on us. But it is something that we intend to fix.
Kyle Cheney.
The president's been getting an earful from members of Congress, Democrats in Congress, about the fact that they stuck their necks out for him when he said, if you like your health plan, you can keep it. Democrats, a lot of them, parroted him and believed him, you know, believed that what he was saying was correct, and that made it, you know, politically saleable to their constituents. So, you know, now he's out there covering for them and saying, look, if they said that based on what I said, you know, it's on me because I wasn't, you know, I didn't asterisk that with the fact that some people were actually going to lose their plans.
Let's hear from Kyle in Exeter, New Hampshire, independent caller. Hey, Kyle.
Hi, how are you? Thank you. My problem with the whole thing is maybe it should have been called the Deplorable Care Act, because it doesn't address all of the other medical insurances that we have. We have insurances on our cars, workmen's compensation, insurances on our houses, our business, our cities, our states. All of them have medical coverages. Why do we need all of that? Why not one single payer, and then we just take and eliminate all these other insurances, and there's more than enough money to cover it? And why has the medical cost gone from 5% when I was a young man to now 16%? Could you answer those questions, please?
Thank you.
Sure. I mean, you know, the cost of entitlements in particular, and then the fact that healthcare consumes close to a fifth of the U.S. economy, that is a problem that I think both sides of the aisle identify. And the debate and the fierce debate has always been over how do you address that. You know, the entitlement programs, whether there's reforms to Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid in there too, and now the Affordable Care Act. You know, clearly the partisan divide has prevented sort of a wholesale look at how to attack those. And as for single payer, you know, I alluded to this earlier, but there's not a whole lot of you know, political constituency pushing for single payer because it's been a non-starter. Again, politically and particularly in the center and on the right. So, you know, whether that gains any traction if the Affordable Care Act flounders is an open question.
There's a tweet here. I wish the caller was actually on the phone so we could ask them why they're asking this, but James Hard wants to know, what % of health care spending is spent in emergency rooms?
Yeah, I don't know the number on that, but it is a good question, and that's part of the goal of the Affordable Care Act, and actually a lot of other, you know, smaller scale health reform efforts is to get people out of the emergency rooms. It's a place right now where people people go to get their primary care. If they get a cold or a minor injury that you could normally call up your doctor, they're going to the emergency room, which is way more expensive than if you had insurance and saw your doctor on a regular basis, prevented catastrophic illnesses before they happened. So I don't know what the percentage is, but the idea is to get that percentage down, whatever it is, because that's a lot of the cost driver in health is because of emergency care.
What do you make of what former President Bill Clinton had to say last week, recently, just before the President came out and made the change that he announced? You
know, that put the White House in a particularly uncomfortable position. He obviously, this is right at the time of the Upton bill that we discussed earlier, was just being talked about, and they're scheduled to vote on it as they did on Friday. Before that vote, President Clinton came out and said, you know, President Obama's got to make good on his promise that if you like your health plan, you can keep it, even if that means a change in the law. Well, as we know, since then, President Obama endorsed a fix that did not involve a change in the law, and so clearly, you know, President Clinton, you know, stepped out a little bit in front of President Obama and put them in an uncomfortable position. President Obama had always said, I intend to do something to fix this issue, but he stopped short of saying, I'm going to endorse the Upton bill, which he still, again, has issued a veto threat over. So I think President Clinton forced the White House's hand in a little bit, and there's been speculation about, is that to help Hillary if she decides to run? You know, we're still 3 years away from 2016, so it's tough to say, to really evaluate the politics of that. But it did force the White House to, you know, take a stand, which happened not to be the stand exactly that Bill Clinton identified.
So explain something for us. Prior to the Upton bill last Friday, what the president came out and asked for was being described as an administrative fix. How does it work? Is it something the president signs by executive order? Is any legislative action required?
You know, all we've seen, and to my knowledge, all that they've issued and plan to issue is a letter that they sent to state insurance commissioners from CMS, which is one of the agencies implementing the health law, that says, just so you know, we're not going to enforce the minimum standard provisions for plans in the individual market for people who currently have them. So if those plans were going to be canceled, we're going to look the other way and say you can continue to implement those. So you touched on a little bit what the legal basis is. You're hearing a lot from people that say there isn't really a legal basis for this because the law has certain requirements in it, and they're basically just saying we're going to take a hands-off approach and not enforce it.
So then on the ground, what is sliding for those folks? Talk about these minimum standards and what will be allowed to continue under this action.
Sure. And again, this is only for people in the currently in the individual markets. These are people who are shopping for plans on their own. And these are plans that might lack basic benefits, you know, whether it's certain numbers of primary care visits, or they might have really high deductibles and cost sharing. So while the Affordable Care Act says you can't pay more than $6,300 a year out of your own pocket, plans in the individual market might come with double that, and so people are at more financial risk. So again, the idea of the Affordable Care Act was to take some of that financial risk off of people, but that also requires changes to these plans that are disappearing.
Moving on to Marion now in Frostburg, Maryland. Welcome to the program. You are on the independent line.
Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Everyone seems to be concentrating on the signing up process for Obamacare and not the type of care that we will eventually receive. The problems that we are experiencing in our county is that the doctors already are putting signs up in their offices that they will no longer accept Medicare patients. And I'm a Medicare person. I'm 72. Our doctors are no longer being primary doctors. They no longer can admit you to the hospital, and only a doctor employed by the hospital can admit you. And the end result of this has been our hospital's going under. We have one hospital in our entire county. That's our problem here. And just about everything you kind of say is backwards. And I think we need to be concentrating on the type of care that we're receiving. And I have one...
Assistant Majority Leader.
Ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 95, Senate Resolution 165.
Clerk will report.
Calendar number 95, SRES 165, calling for the release from prison of former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yulia Tymoshenko, in light of the recent European Court of Human Rights ruling.
Is there objection? Without objection, we shall proceed.
Mr. President, I further ask the committee reported substitute amendment to the resolution be agreed to, the resolution as amended be agreed to, the committee reported amendment to the preamble be agreed to, the preamble as amended be agreed to, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'll make a statement in the record and briefly, in a brief moment, about that particular resolution. There are two other items I want to address first. I ask unanimous consent that Commander Roberto L. Molina, a U.S. naval officer who is currently serving as Senator Harry Reid's Defense Legislative Fellow this year, be granted floor privileges for the duration of S-1197, the National Defense Authorization Act for 2014.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I now ask that the statement I'm about to make be placed in a separate part of the congressional record from the earlier statements.
Without objection.
Mr. Mr. President, search and rescue operations are underway in several Illinois communities today after deadly tornadoes tore through my home state yesterday. 8 people died as a result of the storm, 6 in my state of Illinois, and dozens are seriously injured. My heart goes out to the people who have lost so much and today are sorting through the rubble, trying to reconstruct their homes, their lives, and their businesses. Take a look at what the people in Washington, Illinois, which is near Pekin and Peoria, woke up to this morning. This photo shows what's left of a neighborhood on Devonshire Road. It's difficult to know which property is which because the homes have been reduced to rubble. The tornado cut a path from one end of Washington, Illinois to the other, knocking down power lines, rupturing gas lines, and ripping off roofs. This is another photo of the devastation in Washington, Illinois, and it looks like the whole neighborhood around this photo has been destroyed. Mayor Gary Manier says between 2,000 and 3,000 homes were damaged by tornadoes in his city alone. He credits the advance warning system for saving many lives. Mayor Manier estimates people in Washington, Illinois had about 4 to 5 minutes to take cover. Washington is a city of about 15,000 people in Illinois. It's 150 miles southwest of Chicago. At least 400 homes were destroyed there, literally wiped off their foundation. Standalone homes, multi-family homes, and apartment buildings were damaged. Rescue teams are searching the debris to make sure all the victims are accounted for. Several stories have been reported of debris from Washington ending up near Streator, Illinois, 50 miles away. People in Streator found parts of a plastic recycling bin with the Washington City emblem on it and a UPS package addressed to one of Washington's hardest hit neighborhoods. A person in Lockport, Illinois, which is 2 hours away by car, found a savings bond with a Washington, Illinois address. Many other Illinois communities were struck by the twisters. This photo shows some of the aftermath in Brookport, Illinois, which is in Massac County, far southern end of my state. Several people in Brookport said some homes moved as much as 20 feet off their foundations, 70 homes were destroyed, and many more are damaged. 3 of the 6 people who died in Illinois lived in Massac County. The village of Gifford, Illinois, a small community of 500, suffered severe damage. 160 homes were destroyed in that community. People there say it looks like half the town's been wiped away. In Washington County, 2 siblings, Joseph Hoy, 80 years old, and Frances Hoy, his sister, age 78, died in the storms. They lived in the village of New Minden. Coal City, Nashville, East Peoria, Pekin, many Illinois communities were also hit by these tornadoes. In the face of all this devastation, people all over the state are beginning the painful task of assessing the damage. In fact, we're starting to hear some amazing stories, as we always do. In Washington, Illinois, a 6-year-old boy is credited with saving the lives of his mother and older brother. This 6-year-old, Brevin Hunter, was playing a video game when he heard the wail of the sirens yesterday. He said to his mom, "We've got to get down in the basement." His mom, Lisa Hunter, had heard the siren too, but said the skies looked calm, so she thought it was just a drill. Brevin just wouldn't give up. He told his mom that he learned in school that when you hear the siren, you go somewhere safe. Brevin, his mom, and his older brother Brody grabbed a futon and went to the basement just minutes before the tornado slammed into their duplex in Washington Estates. Lisa Hunter credits her little boy with saving their lives. Laura Lee Cox, a teacher in the city of Washington, credits a former student for saving her life and her husband's. Cox's house was directly in the path of the storm. She and her husband Dave took shelter when they heard the sirens, but they were buried by debris when the twister hit. They survived but could not get out. Cox says she and her husband were dug out from under the rubble by one of her former students. Governor Pat Quinn has declared 7 Illinois counties state disaster areas: Champaign, Grundy, LaSalle, Massac, Tazewell, Washington, and Woodford, all receiving the trucks, communications equipment, and heavy equipment needed to remove the debris. More than 60 National Guardmen are helping with the recovery. Earlier today, I spoke with Jonathan Munkin. He's the head of the Illinois Emergency Management Agency. He assured me that FEMA representatives are in the state assessing the damage and working with state and local officials to help everyone. The state has dispatched technical rescue teams to a number of locations across the state and is providing emergency generators, light towers, and communication systems. The extent of the damage is breathtaking. I commend the mayors and first responders, as always, on the front line bringing order to the chaos, and also to the governor and his team, who are getting immediate help to the communities hardest hit. I'm confident the state will need federal assistance to help with the cleanup and recovery, and I stand ready, along with Senator Kirk, to ensure there is federal assistance to augment the arduous but critical recovery work that the municipalities in the state already have begun. Mr. President, tornadoes aren't new to Illinois. They're pretty common in our part of the world. But this is an unusual situation that we face. In the last 27 years, there have been approximately 194 tornadoes in our state recorded in the month of November. 101 of them were recorded yesterday. 194 in 27 years and 101 yesterday. Is the weather changing in America? Well, I think the people in Illinois would say it's changing for the worse when it comes to the incidence of tornadoes out of season in our state of Illinois. There are two things I can predict about this disaster without fail. A year from now, you'll go back to these scenes and you'll see the most amazing work that's been done by so many families and so many neighbors who pitch in to rebuild. They just never quit and they never give up. They'll be back. They'll be back with their homes and the playgrounds and the churches and the schools and the shops. They'll be back. And the second thing I can predict without fail, and it's not unique to Illinois, but I'm so proud of it, is that neighborly quality where people pitch in to help one another in ways large and small. From showing up last night in Washington, Illinois at one of the shelters with 35 hot pizzas, somebody just brought them in and said, give them to whoever wants them. It's a little gesture like that and many others, large and small, which I'm so proud to report, just part of who we are. Not unique to Illinois, not unique to the Midwest, maybe not even unique to America. But time and again, in times of crisis, it comes out and shows itself over and over again. Mr. President, I have a unanimous consent request for a committee to meet during today's session of the Senate. It has the approval of the majority and the minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that this request be agreed to and that this request be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask in a separate place in the record that the following statement be entered.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to speak to an issue relative to the nation of Ukraine. It is the continued imprisonment of former Ukrainian Prime Minister Ms. Yulia Tymoshenko. Sadly, for over 2 years now, Ms. Tymoshenko has been languishing in prison on politicized charges that she abused her position in connection with the natural gas contract with Russia. This is a floor poster showing the former Prime Minister's trial in Ukraine. This occurred, as I said, more than 2 years ago. I'm not going to judge the wisdom of that contract, one of an endless series of policy decisions that chief executives make in most nations. But this is an imprisonment that has been recognized by the international community and countless human rights organizations and by the European Court on Human Rights as selective prosecution and politically motivated. This is an imprisonment that has the whiff of the neighboring nation of Belarus, where those who run for president against strongman dictator Alexander Lukashenko not only always lose the election, but virtually always get thrown in jail. Talk about a disincentive to run for office. Not in the Ukraine, which has looked to solidify its place among the community of democracies, do we expect this kind of conduct. When I visited Ukraine last May, I had the opportunity to meet with President Yanukovych, the Prime Minister, and the Foreign Minister. I was grateful that they gave me their time. And during those discussions, I always raised the issue of Ms. Tymoshenko's imprisonment, hoping that it would be solved. They gave me kind of indirect assurances that it would in a very brief time. Last year, Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma, Senators Boxer, Casey, Menendez, and I introduced a Senate resolution calling for her release. It passed unanimously last September, over a year ago. And yet here we are today, more than a year later, and a few weeks before an important opportunity for Ukraine to strengthen its ties to the West by potentially signing an association agreement with the European Union, and Ms. Tymoshenko is still in jail. Mr. President, this is not only embarrassing, it's disgraceful. This is a costly distraction from all the other important issues in Ukraine, a nation which has such a great potential. It plays into Russian President Putin's hands who would like nothing more than to see the European Union Association Agreement scuttled because of the failure of the Ukrainian government to release Ms. Tymoshenko. Why would Ukraine's leaders want to succumb to Russian bullying and jeopardize stronger economic and political ties to the West over a simple grudge regarding a previous prime minister? Mr. President, I'm dismayed by the seeming inability to find a reasonable compromise that would allow Ms. Tymoshenko to be released to seek medical treatment abroad, a move that would allow us to instead focus on strengthening the important ties between the U.S., the European Union, and Ukraine. Ukraine is our friend and ally. It helped us in Libya and in Afghanistan. Its leadership rightly sees Ukraine's future with the West. But when you join the community of democracies, you simply do not throw your former political opponents in jail over policy disagreements. You instead offer better ideas and beat them in an election. That's why this summer, regrettably, I introduced a follow-up resolution, again calling for the release of Ms. Tymoshenko. I'm happy to note Senators Barrasso, Bozeman, Boxer, Cardin, Inhofe, Menendez, Murphy, Portman, Rubio, Sessions, and Shaheen have joined me. And let me add, that's not a group of senators that you see agree on too many issues, but we all agree on this. For months we've been waiting, assured that a resolution to Ms. Tymoshenko's case would come to fruition. We saw Ukraine take promising steps toward political reform. We saw some of Ms. Tymoshenko's allies pardoned. And over the course of the last few weeks in particular, we were optimistic. Negotiations led by former President of the European Parliament, Pat Cox, and former Polish President, Aleksander Kwaśniewski, were seemingly making headway toward a solution in which Ms. Tymoshenko would leave, go to Germany for medical treatment. We were hopeful that such a solution could come in time for Ukraine to sign an association agreement with the EU during the Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius at the end of this month, a step strongly supported by the United States. We held off in calling this resolution with the hope that real progress would take place. But last Wednesday, after 2 years of delay and obfuscation on this issue, the Ukrainian parliament postponed a vote on the bill that would have secured this resolution, a move that only adds to the long, long list of missed opportunities in Ukraine. That is why today, with some disappointment, my colleagues and I have decided to move forward and have passed this resolution in the United States Senate. There is still time to find a solution before the Eastern Partnership Summit takes place at the end of the month. So I'm hopeful that our friends in Ukraine will be able to find an honorable way forward that puts the best interest of their country first and ends Ms. Tymoshenko's detention. Mr. President, the final statement I'd like to make is a brief one. I'd like to ask that it be placed at a separate place in the record as well.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise to speak about the President's nomination to fill vacancies on the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. The D.C. Circuit, considered to be the second most important court in America, has 8 active judges out of the 11 judgeships authorized by law. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have argued that the Senate should not confirm any of President Obama's nominees for these vacancies. But where there are vacancies in the federal judiciary, it's the duty of the President to fill them. And it's the duty of the Senate to advise and consent in an honest and professional way to the filling of these vacancies. The Senate does not have the right to unilaterally determine that certain judicial seats and posts should never be filled by certain presidents. That's exactly what's happening today in the United States Senate. Today we're considering the nomination of Judge Robert Wilkins to serve on the D.C. Circuit. He currently serves as a federal judge for the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. He was confirmed by the Senate in 2010 by a voice vote, no controversy. 70 of my colleagues, including 28 Republicans, were here for that confirmation. There's no question that Judge Wilkins has the experience, qualifications, and integrity to be an outstanding circuit court judge. He's a native of Indiana, graduate of Harvard Law, worked for 11 years as a public defender in Washington, then joined the Venable Law Firm where he served as a partner for nearly a decade. As a judge, he's presided over hundreds of civil and criminal cases. He has a reputation, an unblemished reputation, for fairness and integrity. The Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, which strongly supports his nomination, said that he has, quote, a wealth of experience and impartiality and a steadfast commitment to enforcing the rule of law, end of quote. He's been rated unanimously well qualified to serve on the D.C. Circuit by the Nonpartisan American Bar Association. No senator, not one, questioned his qualifications during his hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee. As a sitting federal judge, he's already demonstrated sound judgment and integrity. He deserves an up or down vote on his nomination, and he deserves to be confirmed. But my Republican colleagues have made it clear that once again they are going to filibuster President Obama's appointment to the D.C. Circuit. It has nothing to do with Judge Wilkins, they say. They just don't want any Democratic president to fill this vacancy on this important court, period. This is becoming a pattern, an embarrassing pattern in the United States Senate, and this court is Exhibit A in the abuse of the filibuster. President George W. Bush made 6 nominations to the D.C. Circuit during his presidency. 4 were confirmed by the Senate. President Obama has made 5 nominations for the D.C. Circuit. And if the Republicans filibuster Judge Wilkins today, as they have threatened, then 4 out of the 5 of President's nominees will have been filibustered. Let's go through these nominees just to recollect. Caitlin Halligan, Patricia Millett, and Nina Pillard, some of the finest attorneys in the country, some of the most outstanding women who have ever been nominated for a federal judgeship, were all filibustered and stopped by the Republicans over the last several weeks. My Republican colleagues say this is an argument about caseloads. There's just not enough work to justify these judges. Doesn't make sense. My Republican colleagues were eager to confirm nominees for the 9th, 10th, and 11th seats on the D.C. Circuit when it was a Republican president. You didn't hear them even talk about a caseload then. This is a manufactured excuse for them to filibuster an Obama nominee. When it comes to D.C. Circuit nominees by our current Democratic president, it looks like we will see 4 times as many filibusters as confirmations. This is unacceptable. It's disgraceful. These judicial vacancies are authorized by law, and the president has nominated extraordinarily well-qualified women and men to fill them. These nominees do not deserve a filibuster. They deserve a chance to be judged on their merits. I urge my Republican colleagues to stop these filibusters now and to allow an up or down vote on Judge Wilkins and these other outstanding nominees. We reached a bit of an agreement here a number of years ago that we wouldn't stop these nominees unless there were extraordinary circumstances. That was the term that was used. Turns out one of those extraordinary circumstances is when a Democratic president named Barack Obama makes a nomination. Too many Republicans think that's extraordinary and that they can stop well-qualified, good people from serving our nation and serving on this important court. We'll have a chance this afternoon. I hope with Judge Wilkins he will be given that chance to serve on this important court, and I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.